And now China summoned the U.S. ambassador to protest sanctions on Beijing for buying weapons from Russia. The Chinese government warned the U.S. of consequences if it fails to cancel the sanctions. A spokesman for the Chinese Defense Ministry said that Beijing's decision to buy fighter jets and missile systems from Moscow is a normal act of cooperation between two sovereign states. China slammed that U.S. approach as a blatant violation of the basic norms of international relations. It said the U.S. has no right to interfere in China's decisions. On Thursday, U.S. State Department imposed sanctions on a branch of the Chinese military for what it called significant transactions with Russia's main arms exporter. Joining us now is Mr. Jason Unruhe, political commentator, joining us out of Ontario, Canada. Hello, Jason. Thanks for joining us back on the program. Now, another day, another sanction, and, another appeal for rationality. It seems like, the answer that Washington has to everything that it doesn't like these days is a new sanction, and that's starting to really upset some of, Washington's close trading partners, especially China.
Oh, yeah, I think that this definitely has a kind of twofold effect. One, there is already sanctions being placed on Russia for the alleged hacking of the 2016 presidential election. And Trump just put through sanctions on Russia for that. And they turn around and put these new sanctions on China. It has a twofold effect. One, it wants to show, the U.S. wants to show that they're going to punish anybody for doing business with Russia while they're engaged in these kinds of hostilities. And second, it's just an excuse for Trump to put even more sanctions on China that he was already talking about doing anyway. Essentially, the problem here is that Trump doesn't seem to understand that China is not like a regular, emerging economy that can be so radically harmed by these things. Certainly these sanctions, tariffs, etc., have these negative effects on China, but they don't have the same kind of effects as they would on a developing economy. What he doesn't seem to realize is that China is going to push back, and China is going to push back. Recently, the Alibaba founder, Jack Ma, said that any kind of trade dispute accelerating between the United States and China could last upwards of 10, maybe even 20 years if it continues to go on. So what the U.S. is really trying to do is maintain its hegemonic position within the world, both militarily and economically. Now, militarily, it certainly still has that position, but economically, it has been waning a great deal as of the last 10 years or so. Much of that we've seen of the backlash of the war on terror and the now emerging superpowers, not superpowers yet, but the emerging superpowers of both Russia and China. I think that these are kinds of lashing outs by an empire that perhaps sees its position in the world coming to an end. China is wielding a great deal of influence through the Belt and Road Initiative inside of Africa, which is turning a lot of countries away from the United States and towards Chinese spheres of influence and increasing trade with them, etc. So I think that in this situation, the U.S. is expressing a great deal of frustration. It's very strange that Trump would put these kinds of sanctions on Russia for something that he himself says didn't happen. And then to bring China into this really only as a measure to try to undermine them further, showing that he doesn't really understand the way a lot of the political elites think, the way many business elites that they want to do business with China. I think that it demonstrates a little bit more of perhaps his own ignorance in this type of situation. But I think that a lot of this is being politically motivated by the mainstream political establishment as well, as a way to try to shore up the United States empire and to let these other emerging powers, both Russia and China, know that the U.S. is going to retaliate to any challenge to their authority.
And Jason, and some critics say it's all a guise that Washington is trying to prevent China from fortifying its military further with respect to tensions in the South China Sea.
Oh, definitely. Of course, that's a part of the antagonism between the United States and China, the South China Sea, the China Sea, the part that a lot of people seem to forget. I mean, these are, for the most part, while somewhat disputed, they are still relatively Chinese territorial waters, and every country has a right to maintain their own national sovereignty, to keep themselves developed it's not uncommon for one country to purchase fighter jets from another. In this case, China purchasing them from Russia. I mean, many countries purchase them from the United States, and this doesn't seem to be really a concern for the international community relatively within those regards. I mean, this is a standard practice as normal. China hasn't developed the aeronautical technology to build their own fighter jets as of yet, so they're still going to purchase them from other countries. And the U.S. is trying to curb much of the Chinese influence in the South China Sea, because that seems to be a territory that is where China is expanding, especially considering that there's been a great deal of oil that has been found in the area. So I think that we see a bit of an energy politics power struggle here as to who's going to control the oil in that area. And right now, it definitely seems that China is going to win. They basically already have their artificial islands, etc., to control those energy resources. And I don't think I have to explain to the audience how important energy politics really is.
Thank you for joining us and for your perspective. Once again on the program, Mr. Jason Unruhe, political commentator, joining us out of Ontario, Canada.